The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battlefield. Captain James Reynolds adjusted his helmet, his fingers trembling despite years of experience. The war had dragged on longer than anyone expected, a brutal conflict on American soil that had torn families apart and reshaped the nation's very fabric. It had started as a political divide, but the war escalated into something no one had foreseen, a civil war in the 21st century. Cities became battlegrounds, and soldiers like James were forced to fight not against a foreign enemy, but their own countrymen. The United States was no longer united. James led his unit, a ragtag group of survivors, young recruits, and battle-hardened veterans, through the ruins of what had once been Washington, D.C. The White House was a shell of its former self, its walls riddled with bullet holes, the American flag hanging in tatters. The streets, once bustling with tourists and government officials, were now desolate, filled with debris and memories of a time when peace was taken for granted. "Captain, movement at 2 o'clock," whispered Sergeant Kelly, his voice barely audible over the distant gunfire. James raised his rifle and signaled for his team to take cover. A group of soldiers in makeshift uniforms emerged from the rubble. Rebels, as they were called by the government. But to James, they were just people who had lost everything, just like his own men. The line between friend and foe had blurred long ago. He saw their hollow eyes, their thin frames, and the way they clutched their weapons, not out of aggression, but out of fear. Before James could give the order to engage, a woman stepped forward. She was unarmed, her hands raised. "We don't want to fight," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We have wounded. We need help." James hesitated. War had hardened him, but it had not stolen his humanity. He exchanged glances with Kelly and the others. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. "Let them through," he ordered. His men obeyed, stepping aside as the rebels carried their wounded forward. Medics from both sides began working together, the battlefield momentarily forgotten. For the first time in years, there was no gunfire, only the sound of people trying to save lives instead of taking them. As James watched, he felt something stir within him. Perhaps there was hope for America after all. Perhaps, even in the darkest shadows of war, there was still room for valor, for unity, for peace. But the war was far from over. That night, as James sat by the fire with his men and the rebels, he listened to their stories. Some had once served in the same army he had. Some had lost their families to airstrikes or drone attacks. Some had nothing left but their will to survive. A young rebel, no older than 20, sat beside him. "I used to live in Baltimore," the young man said. "Had a normal life. College, a girlfriend, a job lined up after graduation. Then the government declared martial law, and my father was taken. We never saw him again." James looked at the flickering flames. He had heard too many stories like this. The war had no clear villains, only victims. And he had begun to wonder if the real enemy wasn't the people they were fighting, but the war itself. Morning came, and with it, the reality of their situation. The truce was temporary. Orders would come. They would be forced to fight again. But for one night, James had seen what peace could look like. As dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, James made a decision. If there was a way to end the war, without more bloodshed, he would find it. He had spent years fighting, watching his friends die, following orders without question. But now he questioned everything. And he wasn't the only one. The cost of war. The following week, intelligence reported that the rebels were planning to attack the last government stronghold in the region. James's unit was given orders to intercept and destroy them before they reached their target. It was a suicide mission. James knew that this wasn't just another battle. It was a last stand. He saw it in his men's eyes. The war had worn them down, drained them of their strength and purpose. They fought not because they believed in victory, but because there was nothing else left. The attack came at dawn. Explosions shattered the quiet, and gunfire echoed through the remains of the city. James led his men into battle, pushing forward with everything they had. The rebels fought back with equal desperation, knowing that surrender meant death. Bodies fell on both sides. Smoke and fire filled the air. James's ears rang from the constant roar of artillery. He saw Kelly go down, a bullet piercing his side. He ran to help, dragging his friend behind cover. "We have to fall back," Kelly gasped, blood staining his uniform. James looked around. They were being overwhelmed. His men were outnumbered, exhausted, and running low on ammunition. And yet, retreat meant abandoning the city to destruction. Then, amid the chaos, he saw the woman from before, the one who had asked for help. She was among the rebels, fighting with everything she had. Their eyes met across the battlefield. And in that moment, James made his decision. He threw down his weapon. "Stop," he shouted, raising his hands. "This has to end." Silence fell. The battle slowed. His men hesitated. The rebels hesitated. No one had expected this. James stepped forward, his voice carrying over the ruins. "We can keep fighting until there's nothing left, or we can find another way." A murmur spread through both sides. Soldiers looked at each other, at the devastation around them. They had fought for so long. But for what? The woman stepped forward, lowering her weapon. "And what do you propose?" she asked. James took a deep breath. "A ceasefire. We talk. We find a way to end this, without more bloodshed." There was no immediate answer. The war had taken too much. But the seed had been planted. And for the first time in years, there was a chance, just a chance, that peace was possible. The aftermath. Months later, James stood on the steps of the Capitol. What remained of it? The war wasn't officially over, but negotiations had begun. The first steps toward rebuilding had been taken. Kelly, still recovering, stood beside him. "You really think this will work?" he asked. James looked out over the city, at the people trying to rebuild, at the soldiers who had once been enemies now working side by side. "I have to believe it will," he said. And in the ruins of war, hope was beginning to rise again.